All right. 1 second, I see there is still something not completely working with my slide. But what you just heard is the sound of the soil of our campus in Ghent. It's alive, it's full of signals that we usually ignore. And that's where I work. But then I have to check because the slides are not moving forward. 1 second, I'm sorry. It lost it. 1 second. It's the, yeah. There you go. So, once more, you can hear the soil of the sound of our campus in Ghent. And as I said, it's the place where I work. But of course, if I had to introduce myself the more human way, it would look something more like this. I'm a researcher, AI in design and immersive experiences at HOS University in Kortrijk in Belgium. And I'm part of the Department of Digital Design and Development, Divine. And then some more logos, because I'm also working as an artistic researcher around modern human and AI at the Kask and Conservatory Hoogend Ho-West. All the logos belong together, so probably they don't like that I did this. However, today I will speak about a research project named Decentering Design, a joint project of the institutions that we just saw before, and it also resulted in this publication shown on the screen. And in this project, we tried to ask, okay, how can we decenter the human? How can we consider the more than human side of things? And how can we actually look beyond human intelligences? And to do so, I will take you on a journey that also has shaped us. So we are exploring this more than human topic through a diverse set of perspectives. And in the publication, we also take the same approach. So we're trying to connect theory and practice, and it's always in conversation with design studios such as Superflux, which was already mentioned before, or Forma Fantasma, but also by talking with philosophers, policymakers, and artists. And some of the things that we heard before today will probably come back in my presentation as well. But first, I would like to start with a question. Who amongst us has never felt a connection to the living world around them? And I think everybody has had some sort of connection, even if it was walking this morning to the venue. You would see the mountains, you would hear the birds, feel the sun on your face. And actually, most of us have had this deep sense of connection and entanglement a little bit with the natural world. But then one of our questions was like, okay, but why don't we design with the same sense of awareness mostly? And in this presentation, we try to explore some pathways together to bring them back into our design practices. And I think that's also something that you're already quite used to. And this presentation is divided in two parts. So in the first part, it is a little bit more about me setting the scene and also showing a very short part of my journey into this topic. And talk you through the key thought processes that were important for us to shape our thinking around this. And also try to ask the question, okay, but why is considering other intelligences, the more than human, actually relevant for us as designers? And in the second part, I will highlight 4 lenses that explore design and artistic practices to understand how to shift design towards the more than human world and deal also with the complexities that it actually brings. So let us start by setting the scene. And this is not just a random piece of soil or an inflatable tube crawling under the ground, but it is actually the soil that we have just listened to. And of course, I expect people here already to be somewhat familiar with the notion and discourse around the more than human. But sometimes it's also good to break it down once in a while and also try to explore exactly what meaning those words exactly hold. So before I actually started researching the topic of more than human, this was how I was looking at design in a very simplified version. I knew that we came from a specific history or certain history, and that actually that history defines how we approach current challenges, and also how we potentially ideate potential futures. As Heidegger would have said, we are defined by the past and open at the same time open to the future. And of course, I also understood that in the current era of climate change, that we are part of an ecosystem, and that design actually should think about being a part of this ecosystem. And then a little later, I started zooming in and looking at our own body. And I realized, okay, that what we consider normally the bigger whole surrounding us is actually part of us. It is very hard to determine where actually the bigger whole stops and where we begin. And I started asking questions like, okay, are these bacteria on my skin and in my gut, are they actually essential to what makes me, me? And of course, also recent studies have shown that changes in the gut microbiome can actually have implications for our immune function. So the question is really like, okay, where is the human and where does something else start, right? And so then if we look back at that opening scheme, we saw actually that is a very simplified way of looking at the world. And we start to understand our position a little bit more like this. We stand in relation to all other beings, and we should take into account the connections that we have when designing possible futures. And of course, we are not a unique generation in that respect, right? Like the graph is showing, all past generations, we were embedded in a network of living beings. And these life forms influence the options of each of the generations our previous each of our previous generations had. And so, although we might understand this in a fairly theoretical way, it's sometimes also harder to imagine how that then exactly translates into practice and how we should act. So, in the part of the publication, we spoke also to Forma Fantasma about their project Ultraterra, and they already showed a little bit what these questions might mean. So in this project, they researched the relationship between merino sheep and humans, and how natural history, design history, biological history are actually all intimately connected. And they show how wool has shaped culture, habits, landscapes, our bodies, but also those of the bodies of the sheep. The selective breeding, for instance, of the sheep has changed their anatomy, and now they need regular shearing to keep them actually mobile and alive. But of course, it's not only others that are impacted by us. If we shortly shift our perspective, we can actually say that by requiring cultivation, storage, protection, grain actually tried to transform us from wandering foragers to sedentary beings. And we became deeply entangled in that life cycle. And of course, in turn, we changed the grain as well. And so both the examples show this idea of intergenerational embeddedness. We are part of a bigger whole, but not only an ecosystem functioning in a specific way, but it also encompasses culture, habits, evolution, and is always multi-species. So if we then think back to the opening question, we sometimes feel and sense this on a deeply personal level. And this is also what David Abraham actually said in his seminal book, The Spell of the Sensuous, referring to this all as the more than human world. And by doing so, he foregrounded that what lies beyond us, that the world is just much more than us, and that we are always intertwined with everything around us and around us. So this idea is actually vastly shared across cultures, different academic fields, through activists, religions, indigenous cultures. And some describe this idea of this interconnected sphere as the critical zone, Pachamama, the weather world, or Gaia. But it all relates a little bit around that same idea. We are all worldings, intimately intertwined with all other worldings. And so in every fiber of our existence, we are co-evolved beings with a shared history, a shared culture, and a shared future. Yet, if I then look at our processes, policies, and most activities as a society at large, we can actually see that we are not really acting according to this entanglement, this dependency, this co-evolution. We often see other beings as resources. We see our environment as a resource that can be extracted and used to be and used for benefit of us. And of course, this leads to imagery like this, which rapidly becomes our future. This is also, of course, something to think about if we talk about AI and the supply chain issues that come with creating all these data centers. And we are actually causing a mass extinction. And this is, of course, also something that is not just visible in a graph, but it's also something that is experienced on a day-to-day basis. For instance, I encounter less birds than my parents before me did, but for instance, my children will encounter maybe even less birds than me. And then I start, of course, to wonder, like, okay, what kind of humans will we be when more and more species go extinct? So co-evolution is becoming more and more like co-extinction. And this is also what Tom van Doren actually explores in his latest work. He says that this time demands a genuine reckoning with ourselves as the agents of mass destruction. And he explores actually this notion of dying with, how that can be something productive, something that enables futures rather than ending them. And he actually positions mourning as a way to open up the reality of the world we are ushering in, and also for something for us to allow us to reflect on how we can change this trajectory. But of course, to make this shift, we must delve in more explicitly in the concepts underlying the modern human, and also act in accordance with it. So we need to look at the world in a different way, and I think also here it's a good example how we are already trying to do this all together. We have to stop seeing ourselves as being at the top of this evolutionary pyramid, but also not seeing ourselves as the center of the world. Because if we keep positioning ourselves as exceptional beings, different than all others, we will always assign lesser value to what is all around us, right? And so if we want to act within that modern human relationality, we need to question our anthropocentric worldview. And of course, then you can ask, okay, but don't we have a lot of SDGs and other models in the sustainability discourse that actually already try to help and do this? But of course, this discourse is not really reflecting on our position fundamentally. It still operates within these preconceived notions as the human separate from the rest of things. And these instruments are developed within these anthropocentric frameworks and policies. And of course, they all try to attempt to match our need for growth and development with the planetary boundaries. But is this then enough? And the idea still remains then that all others can still be treated as resources. And so what we see as resources react to our actions and have been doing so all along. And it's not just our actions to which all others react, right? That would be a very narcissistic idea to actually think. We are all terraforming species with individual perspectives, reacting to each other, influencing each other. And we all have agency, and we should foreground this with our actions as well. So we really should actively engage this understanding. Each living being faces choices daily, right? And it's through interactions with others that these choices transform into specific pathways. It's shaping individual lives, but also evolution as species as a whole. And so evolution is like a continuously communicating vessels, which in which each action influences innumerable other individuals and vice versa. There is a relationality that defines who we are, right? And although we not always are able to exactly grasp this, we should also not put it aside, think that's too complex, and avoid that complexity. So, to sum up in this first part, we should always design with this image in mind. We are indiscernible from all other beings, and there is no divide between us and the other. Every being has a perspective, an agency to shape the future, and we all do this in continuous relation to each other. We contaminate, in the best kind of the word, all life around us. So in short, we also should widen the scope of design as much as possible into these complexities, into past entanglements and future extinctions, and aim to craft new paths of decolonization, ecological regeneration, and environmental justice. And so to widen the scope of design, we also need to start asking different types of questions within our design and design practices. But then, how can we do this? How can we deal with all these complexities? Because, of course, it's okay, we have all these questions, we know a little bit what we're trying to do, but then the step is, okay, but how to implement that in our current practices? How can we convince the people that we work with that this is something important that we need to do? But first and foremost, how do we as designers engage with this? So, through our project, we kind of found these 4 types of lenses that we've been looking through to look at various artistic projects, for various design projects, and these help us to try to ask different questions as designers. So first and foremost, we have to reconnect to our own senses. Even though, of course, we are still using our own senses every day, we are somewhat grown desensitized to much of the world around us, like our urban, digital lifestyles disconnect us from the rhythms of the modern human world surrounding us. And I mean, who else? I mean, even this morning, I checked my weather app to determine if it's going to rain in 5 minutes to walk to the campus. And instead of looking just up to the sky and check if it was actually going to rain, right? So it's already quite embedded into the way how we behave. And of course, as highlighted in the first part, we often see nature as completely something separate from us, rather than something that we're actually embedded in. And so meaningful design for a modern human world begins also with grounding ourselves in the entanglements that weave together our shared existence. So we must rewire our very being and train our attention on matters that are more than human. And this is, above all, a bodily and experiential task, undertaken in concert with all other ways of being. And to do this, we have to take a situated approach, also already mentioned by Margarita, how important that is. We should design, think, and act with attention to context, be it social, ecological, temporal, ecological, material, rather than trying to assume this universal or detached perspective, right? So, for instance, when I did a project on a decommissioned train yard, I only felt that immersing myself in that specific place at that specific time allowed me to become entangled with the life surrounding me. I started to notice the environment in a different way and how the relationships between species and their surroundings continuously take shape. I was there with an ecological expert who said at one point, okay, but here, can you smell the smell of the fox? And I couldn't because I'm not trained to that. But then subsequent times I understood that there was actually a foxhole in this decommissioned train yard. And this created this whole different perspective compared to the explanations of others, the reference documents, maps, or even the quick site visits. It really takes time to embed yourself in a specific location. And we can immerse ourselves by engaging all our senses and also by creatively engaging with our environment through practices such as sketching, collecting, observing, and all this to build a deeper understanding of the place that we are in. And in doing so, we become more immersed in the world surrounding us. And I already saw here on the table, like also some sketches and the same kind of trying to build that materiality around that. So one of the questions that we really should ask as designers is, okay, how can design sensitize humans to their embeddedness within modern human systems? And then technology can actually also help us, aid us in designing differently. And we already saw the little sneak peek of that before, right? Because technology can actually help us expand our senses to open pathways and perceive and interpret realities that lies beyond our daily normal human limits. So from thermal imaging to bioacoustic monitoring, we now have all kinds of tools to reveal aspects of the world once that was imperceptible to us. And it's also the same thing as having this the example of Paco's presentation, where having a longer time period or having a slow motion camera actually helps as well. So our human senses are only one way of perceiving reality. A bat or a bee would experience a world entirely differently, right? And these technologies can actually offer us a brief glimpse into non-human perspective. This is also something we did in the first corner there, where we were at an estate where we were listening to the bats and see them fly around in real time. And so indeed, as Paco already stated, sometimes we can translate it actually the way how others perceive by, for instance, bringing ultraviolet light to the visual spectrum. And we can momentarily, and also a little bit speculatively, see a field of flowers as how a bee might understand it. And this is also exactly how Craig P. Burrows reveals the hidden fluorescence of plants under sunlight. We can see the colors and textures that lie beyond human vision. And it's of course because bees naturally perceive the spectrum, it's a rare glimpse into their world. And so, for instance, if we then look at an example by Daisy Ginsberg, a project called Pollinator Pathmaker, she takes that idea further and she creates a tool that prioritizes the bee's experience. So, for instance, instead of developing a garden for human aesthetics, he cultivates it with empathy for pollinators, shaping it around their needs and habits. But yeah, on the flip side, as humans, we also have an insatiable hunger for data. We quantify, we measure, we categorize, from mapping entire ecosystems to tracking the neural activity of octopuses or the migratory paths of birds. And the drive to collect and analyze information is deeply embedded also in our human culture. And of course, this desire stems partially from a belief that more data leads to better decisions, right? By knowing more, we feel more empowered to predict, intervene, or analyze, or protect. And in many ways, these data collection can be actually tied to this idea of it being an act of care, an attempt to understand and preserve the world around us. But as we all know, life around us resists total comprehension. Life is dynamic, it's interwoven, and it often operates in ways that escape human logic. So no data set, no matter how vast, can fully capture the complexity of an ecosystem in flux. And also don't mistake the projects shown here as giving a full comprehension of this ecosystem, of this jungle. Of course, there are many entanglements that remain unnoticed, whether it's by us or by the AIs. So indeed, some experiences are fundamentally unknowable. And this is also what Thomas Nagel wrote in What Is It Like to Be a Bat? Because more than human perceptions and ways of being can never be fully understood by humans. No matter how advanced our technology, no matter how many sensors we put on our bodies, we will never get there. And so the world beyond is full of perspectives beyond our grasp. So again, this raises another question. How can we design in a world where we can never know everything? And then another way to decenter ourselves is by seeking out the spaces between, speculative spaces that lie between human experiences and experiences of other than human beings. So we can explore the spaces between through experimental engagement. And here you can see the example of Thomas Twage, who is the goat man. And he used prosthetics to experience aspects of a goat lifework. And imagine, he did this, I believe, for a week. So that's quite long. And of course, this is of course a very speculative undertaking, but also these type of experiences can reshape our understanding. And if it's not of goats, then it's of ourselves, because Thomas Twage also reflected on this project as lots of what I was doing to get closer to being a goat was actually trying not to engage in the mental time travel that we humans do all the time, having worries, having regrets, having hopes. And then he added, probably the thing that turns people mad is somehow forgetting that they're animals as well. And so this idea of the spaces between can also be explored through material design. So here we can see a project by Animali Domestici, Hardware Stories, and they are exploring the creation of floor components that consider the coexistence between insects, bacteria, and other critters. It questions our usual logic of sterilization and cleanliness, right? Because suddenly we are allowing microlife to thrive in the cavity and cracks of our homes of our homes. And so this is also that speculative character that brings out, in the words of Laura Folano, the imaginative and rigorous ability to defy the constraints in a typical design brief. So in this way, it can inform new answers to questions that might have gone unanswered otherwise. And so for us, this was also quite interesting, because that led us to developing this idea of intermediate zones, which is kind of a designed speculative condition between distinct Umwelten, life worlds, where mutual influence and negotiation between actors becomes possible. So for example, we had a first experiment around this concept, and that is relating to the soil that we heard in the beginning and saw a little bit later. So from that same place in Flanders, in Belgium, we collected all these soil samples from the campus, and then through an analog process, we analyzed these soil samples and created these things through what you can see here, which are called soil chromatographies. So by taking the soil samples and creating a sort of photographic process and diluting the soil samples in this water, it is subsequently sucked out by capillary reaction, and it blooms on these papers. And so after 2 days of hanging there, we developed like these kind of readings from the specific soil. And it's kind of, you can consider this as almost an analog infographic. Each ring, each color change, each spike says something about the quality of that soil, the amount of nutrients, the amount of minerals, and so forth. And so in this project, we developed a very speculative analyzing tool to read soil chromatography, and using also some AI to develop this little experimental program. And the outcome of the analysis was again interpreted through AI based on information from research papers. So you would have like a lot of numbers and data, etc., taken out from this more analog reading. And then subsequently, we also had this last, what we called feral prompt, to transform that information again in poetic-like utterances from the perspective of the soil. So for instance, in this slide, you can see these utterances. The AI did not read these samples really as diagnosis or data sets, but more as portraits of impermanence, reminding us that we actually share, humans and the soil share the same material afterlife. And of course, also in this project, the tool was indifferent to the sample being fed. So it could be a soil sample, but it could also be an iris. So I'd like to close this chapter with the following question: like, how can design apply speculation to question existing paradigms and explore realities between actors and species? And so lastly, I think we need to rethink our power structures, because our design language and decision-making structures shape the way that we entangle, but with our governing structures, plants and animals and other actors lack agency and often also remain absent from the decision-making process. So this raises that crucial question, like, okay, how can we actually include non-human actors in our political processes? This was from a project also from a photographer that we know, who we asked, like, okay, maybe go into the European institutions and take pictures of what constitutes natural life within those buildings. And this was basically the best they had. But of course, change is also slowly beginning to emerge. So in 2017, New Zealand granted the Whanganui River legal personhood, which is, as a river, now recognized as a living entity and with its own rights and interest protected by appointed representatives. And this decision was rooted in Maori beliefs, but also ensures then the river's well-being as being legally upheld. But yeah, meaningful change often comes rarely from policy from the start. But of course, the policies mirror the prevailing political climate. So activists, artists, designers play also a vital role in shifting public attitudes, bringing unique perspectives and motivations to engage with and represent non-human actors. And of course, representation can and also arguably should come through conservation and ecological experts. So for instance, here you can see a graph of the ZOOP model, which is developed by Het Nieuw Instituut in the Netherlands, which basically proposes for companies or organizations to include a speaker of the living who is actually looking at all the decisions the company makes from a non-human point of view, and then reflects if that's actually a sensible step. And of course, sometimes it's as simple as shifting our language. So learning to speak of the agency and sentience of other beings. The words that we use shape also how we think and frame our challenges. And also, of course, we can begin by questioning policy documents, but also your own design briefs, and try to see, okay, but what is actually the anthropocentric language in here? And this can be at the start of the project, but it should also be something ongoing, and then maybe you start to ask different type of questions, and maybe your whole project brief will change as well. So here's an example of one of the times that we did this with architectural offices, where they actually looked back on one of their own design briefs and then questioned, actually, okay, but if we look at it from this perspective, we get a whole different design brief. So the last question I like to ask is, okay, how can design contribute to distributing power equitably between actors? So indeed, these lenses lead us to ask new kinds of questions, but they also push us to rethink what we measure and value. And looking across all these lenses through the artistic and design practices, we have, of course, a set of wider key themes that is coming back. And it's, of course, also the same one that were already slightly introduced at the beginning, and also should not be a stranger to you all right now. But these are these three themes that also very much cut across these the practices. And of course, you can have a whole discussion if these are the right terminologies or the right ways to look at it. But at least for us, they remind us that our dualistic worldview has shaped products and processes from the very beginning, but that we actually can counter this, and that we can design with agency from other perspectives in mind. So design is always situated, it's always relational, and always is entangled in multi-species worlds. So what matters most is how the design processes connect to these themes of a more than human reality. And this is also a call on us, right? Because how can we actually acknowledge these multiple perspectives, humans and non-human alike? And how can we remember that every design process is situated in a specific place, a context, and how can we reconsider what we attribute value to? And so this is also not something that you can only do at the beginning of a process or at the end. It is a continuous undertaking of looking at our tools and trying to expand our practice and change our ways of working. We cannot really shape a multi-species future with the design steps of the past. And so to deal with these complexities, we have also been developing all types of exercises. And of course, now we don't have time to go into this, but each of them tries to contribute to a better understanding of the questions that we raised before. And of course, they always do this partially, and it's also always like maybe a tiny step within this larger process. But then this is actually the main point. Okay, this is also an invitation for you as designers to extend the practice yourself. How can I contribute to my own practice in my own context? It's kind of a little bit like Paco giving you homework, right? And with the theme of this symposium in mind is, okay, how can we also look at these tools and develop these tools and techniques to understand intelligence beyond the human towards AI? With that question, I would like to thank you very much. If you would like to explore the topic further or look at the exercises in detail, I have them also with me, so you can take a look. But thank you very much. Appreciate it.